Rod, Raymond, Chris?
This whole question of whether excellence or school success is determined by extrinsic or intrinsic factors is, I think, really interesting. On the one hand, that is it poverty and joblessness that contribute to low academic performance, and what's the helpfulness of thinking about that versus is it things inside of what's the school, inside the realm of potential and influence. There's nothing more irritating than sitting with school people who blame everything on poverty, right? But there's also nothing more irritating than sitting with legislators who blame everything on school people. It's clearly both, and we need to be able to tackle both in a meaningful way. One thing that seems to me to be important is that there are incentive structures and standards that make sense and seem reasonable to people. So an A school or let's take a B- school that's a B- school with all wealthy suburban kids who've been read to from the day they were born is a radically different place from a B- school in a poor neighborhood with single-parent families and a high percentage of free and reduced lunch. And the fact that our accountability system isn't adept enough to recognize that distinction undermines the sort of morale and sense of what's reasonable among teachers. Does that mean that poor kids shouldn't be held to the same standards, and can they achieve at the same standards? They absolutely can, but the kind of social capital that comes with kids who are resourced and who have been invested in is a statistical reality, and to figure out an accountability system that recognizes that. So you could be in a B school, and if it's a B school that's serving really poor kids, that could be the single best school in the district and ought to be recognized as such. I think that would create much less of the kind of griping and moaning and backlash against the accountability system if we could think about how to create one that's adept enough to recognize those very obvious statistical differences that come with the background of the parents and families of the kids who are in those situations.
A 90 in one neighborhood is different from a 90, obviously being arbitrary in my number.
Can I ask him to kind of repeat that? Because I want to make sure I'm understanding that if I'm poor and I have a B average, and then I'm middle income or upper income and I have a B average, then that B is not the same. I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
I mean, what's going on there is terrible, and they ought to be knocking down the doors to get that principal fired, because in that environment, if you can't get an A, then under our current system, then something radical is going wrong. Nevertheless, that's not recognized. By the same token, in this neighborhood, if a school is getting a B, they are doing extraordinary things that need to be understood and copied and mirrored and held up, because what's going on there is the very epitome of educational excellence. Why? Because a lot of educational performance on the really rough standard of standardized tests happens inside of the household, not inside of the school, and it's reflected by the metrics that we hold the system accountable to, but the actual causes are not necessarily the school itself.
And I would just say I would just say on that, I disagree to the point that there's a school in New Orleans now, and I invite you if you haven't been to Collegiate Academy, Wasai Academy, that 4 years ago, their incoming freshman class with the demographics you were just talking about, most kids, all of them high poverty, all of them from extremely rough, difficult areas in New Orleans. Fast forward to today, their first graduating class, or rather this past spring, I believe 98% of their graduating kids got into college. 98%. All of these kids, or the majority of them, were 2 or 3 grade levels behind when they started, okay? And all of those kids, about 97% of those kids, are all first-time college attendees in their families. And that's one case of many. We found high poverty, high-performing schools all around the state. And so those children will now be in college competing against suburban wealthy kids who, as you just said, have a head start. But these kids caught them. And the thing is because there was someone, and there are a lot of folks out there, who believe that if you put in the time and the effort and the expertise, not saying that folks don't put in time and effort, as well as expertise, but just what it takes to move those kids ahead, then it can be done. What that requires, though, is much longer hours. at school. It requires much more sophisticated coordination of teachers amongst class. And I mean, I've seen how the system works. And that they've gotten to the point where in the accountability system we have, they were afforded a 10-year charter renewal for meeting the high bar that Caroline articulated, from accountability to finances to all of the metrics. And again, with the most challenging and severe kids. That's not to say that it doesn't have to, again, and that's the charter school. But then you can go to other parts of Louisiana where we found high-performing, right here in Baton Rouge, high-performing, high-poverty schools. So I think, again, it's about the will and recognizing it. And I think this conversation, it's got so far where it always turns into either or. I think you were kind of tipping on it. Go to it and say it can be an and. Yes, poverty is an issue, and we can have high expectations, and we have pockets of success, and we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And work within that framework, in my mind, to move this ahead.
We have another and.
You also
There's a lot of
have
ands.
finite resources that, unfortunately, the way that this is done now pits one against the other. So the problem is there is no and. Again, I will say that in order for, because there are schools that are labeled Fs here, but they have the highest rate of achievement of any schools here.
Right.
So the point is
Do you mean the highest rate of improvement?
Park Elementary, Winborn Elementary, Capitol Middle, Capitol Elementary. These are schools that we have a shared success agreement with the RSD. Now, that shared success agreement says that if they continue to make progress, then they won't fall into the RSD. However, some of those schools are still labeled as F. Now, the accountability system doesn't look at that level of movement. So all you are is an F. You can't be an F with improvement or F and improving. So that's what I'm saying. What we've got to start looking at is we are the same resources. If this were a system where it was based on academic need, some of the very children who have benefited from these reforms are not the most academically in need. Because there is no mechanism that says, you need more help than you. It is about choice, but it's about savvy choice.
Yeah.
And if, as a savvy parent, I know how to take advantage of the circumstances that find myself, and my child is not in need, what have we really done?
But I think,
But before we go there, because I want to go back to this issue with the accountability system, and you know, I know the superintendent's looking for examples. Ms. Brister's Blue Ribbon School in Scotlandville had 32 other schools down the street from it. Same neighborhood, same kids, same socioeconomic environment. The Blue Ribbon School, it was a B at the same year that the same group of kids in the same community were at DNF schools. And so I guess what frustrates me is this idea that because when we know that people have been successful and we have school leaders that have been successful with poor kids, and for whatever reason, we've not been able to replicate it in the same neighborhood. You know, so we can't say that these are kids across town or kids from another city. I mean, they're examples in this community in the very same neighborhood right down the street from each other.
Well, I think it's a I think that's a good example, because I really believe this is the only question I answered on the questionnaire. Really, excellent schools exist where there's community. And you have to forgive me, I know you're a preacher. My dad, he passed this year, and he was a pastor of this church. And community to him really mean common unity. So I know I sound like Jesse Jackson there. When I say common unity, it's a common goal and responsible people, right, that are unified to meet that goal. And it's a proven fact. When you have, we talk about a good instructional leader, but when you have somebody that puts out a vision and a common goal, and every adult in that building or that's connected to this unit goes after that goal, and the children go after that goal, you have an excellent school. I mean, we're here in the middle of Glen Oaks. You have a school, Forest Heights Park, one of the highest performing schools in the district. Likewise, you have Marydale. You have other schools that are, at the bottom. But it's people, it's the principal giving a vision, the teachers buying into it, the parents buying into it, the students buying into it. When you have community and I define that as community. When you have community, you have excellent schools. Look at magnet schools. They have a common goal, right? I mean, they have a common goal, most of them to get in, most of them to reach a thing, and it works. What we have here really is we have no common goal that exists. So the capacity to really have excellent schools, and I know it's another question, really, it don't exist because you have very few groups of adults that take a responsibility. I mean, at Forest Heights Park, everybody don't have a dad and mom at Forest Heights Park. I mean, they don't, but you have adults that have become responsible for those children that do and don't, along with their own, and they've taken that and they've all gone toward this one goal, to get these kids to McKinley Middle Magnet School, to get them to Baton Rouge Magnet High, and it happens. I mean, it's right down the street, 0.2 miles. You can go 0.2 miles down the other way, you have an F school, because you don't have a group of adults that are working together, whether it's principals, and I don't know the principals there, so if you're here, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not trying to down you, but when you have you have community, you have an excellent school. And community does not equal black people or poor people. That's not community. I mean, a lot of times we define this community and then you just think in poor people, people of color, that really has nothing to do. If I have a common goal and I'm going to help somebody reach that goal, I become a part of that community. And so I think just defining community and making sure, you're talking about common goals and unity, those are the things that really get us somewhere.
And Caroline, I certainly want to give you an opportunity to chime in. I just want to throw out before the group that Raymond, certainly to my ears, said that currently we don't have the capacity here to deliver excellent schools. His reason is the absence of a sense of community. I'd certainly like for you and your remarks and others after to react to that idea, that the delivery system just doesn't exist to create excellence in North Baton Rouge.
What I was hearing was basically demographics can lead to your destiny, and I don't believe that we should set different standards based on that, but I do think we should recognize that children come to school prepared at very different levels based on their home life and what they're coming from, and that part of the solution may be in how we fund public education, and to recognize that there are schools that have greater challenges, as Superintendent Taylor recognized, health care, home. When you come to school and you're hungry and you don't have a good doctor and all those things, that absolutely impacts your academics. So I would love to see, and we have it inside the Recovery School District, is a weighted formula that recognizes that you can drive more dollars based on the needs of that student. I'm not saying it's the answer, but I sure would like to see that come up in the debate around, again, to incentivize those schools that are meeting greater challenges through, unfortunately, money, because a lot of times that is what will get people to do what they need to do. So that's one option. On the community side, I would say, again, we love to use words, community engagement, quality, excellence. What is that? What is community engagement? And why do we seem to limit that conversation so often to poor communities? Poor communities have a lack of engagement. I think that could be a couple ways. One, poor communities don't have the strong political voice. They're not the ones donating to political campaigns. They're not the one with lobbyists. So there's that side of the argument. But I would argue that I have friends sitting in Bossier Parish whose kids are sitting in C and D schools, and they think it's a good school. As Dr. Howard Fuller calls it, a happy school. So again, that community engagement piece to me, needs to be better defined. Do you mean community engagement with parents? Do we mean community engagement with faith-based organizations? I'm sure it's a plethora of engagement, but I don't like when we talk about
Hold on just a second, because I do want to get, but thank you. I do want to get back to the comment that I personally found provocative, and it was that we currently don't have a delivery system in place that is sufficient to create excellence in the schools in North Baton Rouge. And
I don't think that anybody has a delivery system right now, because what we're expected to do is constantly changing. Now, the state is revamping its accountability system. So we're going through a transition curriculum now. So what the curriculum looks like now is going to change in a year or two. I don't know that people recognize the difficulty that it is to change everything. How you teach, what you teach, when you teach it, what materials you use. And you have to pivot on a dime. Okay, that's one. And to Ms. Romer's point about community engagement, let me say this. This is the one thing that I think that we need to be mindful of. When we are talking about communities like this, one thing that you will see oftentimes is a conversation about who needs to make the decision. One thing that is very troubling to me is that there's a tendency to want to disenfranchise people from choosing elected representatives to make those decisions. Oftentimes there'll be conversations about doing away with elected school boards. And where you see that predominate is in communities where there are a disproportionate number of poor people, because there's a belief that poor people cannot be self-determining. I worked in a school where 100% of the families were eligible for free lunch. 2 public housing communities in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I just drove by the school on my way to the airport today. And if I wasn't going to be late, I would have went inside. Those kids achieve. It can be done.
Yeah, and I want to clarify, I didn't say anything about community engagement. I said community didn't exist, right?
And
so it's a
The
different...
community does exist.
Yeah,
The community does
yeah,
exist.
but that common unity, right, toward a goal. So in my house, I had 11 brothers and sisters, right? And my parents, it's 12 of us, and all of us graduated from college because as a unit, they got us there. And so every teacher that we experienced at Prescott, Howard Park, they had that same goal in mind after Bishop talked to them, right? And then we got to that end goal. So what I'm saying is we can't put our head in the sand as it relates to North Baton Rouge where we sit. We do not have a common goal, and we are not unified to reach that goal as it relates to children in North Baton Rouge.
So does that mean that the challenge in the delivery system is found in the community? Is that what I'm hearing?
Because my theory of change is things like money, policy, things don't change people, people change things. Okay, and so if we're going to have a community-led change or transformation that presents, not some 2 or 3 year boost, but a generational change, it's really going to take people changing things, not things changing people. No policy has ever changed anybody. It's a person that implements that or fails to implement that really changes anything. And so without that, it's not going to change.
That was not an excellent school. That was not an excellent school system. Certainly kids were not prepared on the day that I saw them to teach 11th grade U.S. history because they couldn't read a textbook above about a 4th or 5th grade level. So something had broken down there. And yet, Superintendent Dobart points out an example today in New Orleans serving kids who by all statistics are actually poor, have more challenges today than the kids I taught, and yet that school is graduating 98% of its seniors. Now, I think if you talk to the leaders of that school, they tell you they're not yet at excellent, but that's their goal, is that at that individual school to make it excellent. And so what is it? Like, what was so different about that one school versus the one I taught in? And I think they would tell you there's a couple of things. And I think the delivery system, I think it's adults, it's us getting in the way with excuses of what actually makes it. Because quite simply, if you ask the people that run the school that Superintendent Dobart talked about, they'd say, number one, the educators are empowered. The principal, the teacher, we get to make decisions for the kids that show up at our school every day about what it is we need to do for them to get them to this bar. Not a relative to bar because we said you showed up and you happen to be a kid of color, or you happen to be a kid that may have come from less means. We actually expect every one of you to score 25 on the ACT. We expect every one of you to apply to 5 colleges and get into at least 4 of them. We expect you to be excellent. And we're going to do everything in our power to get you there. And this year they came up 2% short of that. So they'd say first it's that power, it's that autonomy the educators have. I'd say 2 would be this accountability. They feel the pressure not so much to the state, they actually feel the pressure to parents and the community to get that done for kids. and they feel ashamed, they feel they haven't accomplished that goal when 2% didn't make it over that bar. I think three, and the final thing I'd say is you walk into these schools, and I think, I would just do this. Go visit any school, and within 5 minutes, whether you've been an educator or not, I took my own family members into my school, and I think within about 2 or 3 minutes of just walking into the school, observing classrooms, I think you realize whether the school is actually excellent or whether it's not, whether it's kind of moving there, whether it has a culture moving towards change. And that's not to blame any one adult, it's not to blame a system, but you just see something in some schools where it all works together. And I think the real question and the thing that we think about at new schools for Baton Rouge is what is it that makes that? What is it that allows those educators to build a culture in that one building that says, well, however those kids came to me today, we're going to get to excellence, despite all those things. And yet there are hundreds of schools in this country. There are schools in this city. There are a lot of schools about 70 miles south of here that are doing that. And I think the real question is, why don't we, as this community, start standing up and saying, let's get every school here excellent. Let's actually make the schools in this part of the parish the best schools in the state of Louisiana, then the best schools in the Southeast, then the best schools in America. We can do it, but I think we're sort of letting other things, accountability systems and policy, get in the way of that. It's being done in hundreds of communities across the country. Let's do it here. Let's do it for a lot of schools and a lot of students.
Bringing us back to the question, and Eric, you can dive, back to the question, because while I am absolutely thrilled at the wonderful examples that we see in New Orleans, the question is about the delivery system in Baton Rouge, and specifically as it relates to North Baton Rouge.
And so I go back to Raymond's definition, and to some level I agree with him, because I think our issue is that, again, when we're talking about community and we're talking about community engagement, and if that is what is the delivery system, it's not going to look the same for everybody. And so you're going to have schools that have a mix of high poverty or, high income kids. And so what it's going to take to get a common goal set for one school, is going to be different. I think at the end of the day, I look at my own kids, and, so we don't go to PTA meetings, don't have time to go to PTA meetings, but for many people in this conversation, the lack of engagement by parents because they don't show up in the classroom is an issue and a challenge. Expectations. I mean, I wish my kids would come home with a B. And so it's been drilled in them. And so since they've been in kindergarten, my kids make straight A's. And so when we look across the landscape in this community, when there's situations where parents aren't engaged, then what are we going to do? Just throw our hands up? And so we have to look at models where teachers, there are examples where teachers, because the parents aren't there for whatever reason, the teachers are going into the community, knocking on doors, finding out what's going on in some of the roughest neighborhoods. And so I think that the issue is that we've kind of come up with this blanket definition of community, and every school is a community in of itself, just like Baton Rouge and New Orleans are different, Sharon Hills Elementary and Forest Heights Park are different. And so in order to achieve excellence at both schools, it may take a different formula.
But the definition of excellence, however, is from one frame, because they're all judged the same.
But the formula on how we get there.
There's got to be some non-negotiables.
Well, I mean, but what if they're meeting the non-negotiables? What if they are? Okay. What if they're making progress? There's got to be recognition for that too. The other thing too is you've got to understand too that education is more than just the people in the school. It is an unrealistic expectation to have people who have to move kids to the highest levels of cognition. Being a teacher today is the hardest job in the educational system, because what these teachers must do, not to be nice, their livelihoods are on the line. If they don't move children to this level of proficiency in this amount of time, a teacher can lose his or her job. There's no recognition of making progress. So what we have to be looking at is if excellence is going to look different, if the trajectory for excellence looks different from based on where the child started, we want to get them to where they need to be. But if their journeys are different, how their journeys are evaluated may have to be different.
I would just like to add that when you talk about the delivery system, I think we need to have a diverse delivery system, one that's just more literally school-focused. So we say those closest to the children should be able to make those decisions, and make those decisions that's going to allow, as Superintendent Taylor points out, to get from a certain point when you get them to start to meet what that bar is. Some people take on the most challenging kid that's very, very low, and they know there's an accountability system there that while it doesn't factor in growth, that we can be the champions of our own growth. Because we have schools that have made 20 points growth, and they're still F schools, and they say, yes, we're F, but we're not defined by the F. Look at our growth, and they tell the parents that. And they have a trajectory pointed out that says, with this continued growth, we will meet this bar that's been set, and this is where we started from. So again, I think that it can be achieved, but you have to have, and we have to have in North Baton Rouge, a diverse delivery system of providers. We have to get those closest to the children to be able to make those decisions, to be able to tailor it to their individual schools. So whether it's a family of school concept, but put something in it that's going to be real, that's going to allow that change to happen. Whether it's a charter school, whether it's schools, again, with grade reconfigurations, it has to be something that's real, that's going to speak to, when we start at this certain point, we're going to know that we've achieved because we've reached this point. And you give folks the space to be able to do that. I think what's just been so powerful about what we can literally point to outside of Baton Rouge that's worked in that sense, it has been holding that high standard to give operators the ability to run schools and do well. And we've seen, unfortunately, sort of the opposite here, where we've had that space and they haven't done well. And so we say, let's raise the bar on the type of providers. And so again, it's about, that's how you, in my mind, get to a diverse delivery system. And when you look at it, the more that you can break something down from a centralized bureaucratic system, but hold those, again, like literally that's closest, accountable, you see a difference in it. You know, it's hard for me to try to manage schools, and I'm not there every day. But if I empowered folks and say, look, this is your mission, you have 5 years to achieve it, go forth and do good, let me get out of your way and make sure you follow the law. That's something entirely different. There is a sense of urgency. There is a sense of, man, my job's on the line. And it should be, because our children's lives are on the line. Nobody's telling our children, well, you know, it's okay that we didn't get it right for 10 years, or 5 years, or 1 year, or 1 day, for that matter. So I think there should be like this sense of, like, my job's on the line, because this child's life's on the line.
People can go to stand.org, so stand.org/Louisiana, and they can find out more information about the Baton Rouge chapter of Stand for Children. And really, the takeaway is people just need to get involved, to be more involved in their community, be more involved connecting with other people toward a common goal, which I feel the best goal is ensuring kids graduate high school, college, and career ready.